It all started back in 1955. Around 3:30 in the morning, a businessman was driving along the quiet road next to the Little Miami River, just outside the Loveland, Ohio. There wasn't much around. No traffic, no people, just the sound of the river and the trees moving in the wind. Then his headlight caught something up ahead. Three figures just standing there on the side of the road. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at, so he slowed down. And after a few seconds, he pulled over to get a better look. That decision would end up becoming one of Ohio's most famous cryptid legends. For decades, people in the small city of Loveland have been talking about a strange creature. Some call it the Loveland Frog, others know it as the Loveland Frogman or the Loveland Lizard. Whatever the name is, it's become one of the most famous local legends to ever come out of the Ohio. According to the people who say they've seen it, the creature is around 2, 3 to 4 feet tall, and instead of hopping like a normal frog, it walks on two legs. They describe it as having grey leathery skin with webbed hands and feet. Its head looked like a frog but much bigger with deep wrinkles instead of hair. And almost everyone remembers the same thing, its large, bulging eyes. Most of the sightings have happened around the forest and waterways near the Little Miami River in Claremont County, Ohio, of course. Now, there's no scientific evidence that this thing actually exists, but that doesn't stop people from talking about it. For years, every now and then, someone claims they've seen something that they just couldn't explain. And if you want to know how all of this started, we have to go back to a quiet spring morning in the May of 1955. Later, the businessman was identified as Robert Honeycott. As he sat inside his car, he started to realize the three figures weren't human. For the next few minutes, he didn't move, he just watched. The creatures didn't seem bothered that someone else was there. They stayed near the side of the road, almost like they were focused on something else. Then, one of them did something he never forgot. It slowly raised a thin, wand like object over its head, and a second later, sparks shot out of from the end of it. That was enough for Honeycott. He started his car and drove off, leaving the three figures behind. He didn't take any photos, of course, and nobody found any physical evidence either. And that's one of the biggest problems with this story. There isn't any police report or any newspaper article from 1955 that's been publicly verified. So, everything we knew about that night comes from accounts that surface years later. Now, for the next 17 years, nothing happened. No new sightings, no new witnesses, and little by little, people stopped talking about the story. Without any evidence to back it, most assumed the whole thing would eventually be forgotten. But then, in the early hours of March 3, 1972, something happened that brought that legend back. Around 1 o'clock that morning, Loveland officer Ray Shockey was driving along a riverside drive right next to the Little Miami River. It was still winter in southern Ohio, and parts of the road were covered in ice. So, he was taking it slow. Then, he noticed something sitting near the side of the road. At first, he thought it was just a dog, but before he could get a better look, it suddenly ran right in front of his patrol car. Shockey hit the brakes as hard as he could, and the cruiser came to a stop just a few feet away. Now, with the headlights shining directly on it, he realized it wasn't a dog at all. According to Officer Shockey, the animal slowly stood up on two legs and turned toward him. That's when he realized this wasn't any ordinary animal. He later described it as being around 3 to 4 feet tall, with leathery skin and a face that looked like a frog, or maybe a large reptile. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Chucky just stared at the creature, and the creature stared right back. Then it turned around, climbed over the guardrail, and made its way down toward the Little Miami River. By the time anyone got there, it was gone. Word about it, the sighting spread through the Loveland police. Later that night, another officer went back to check the area. He never found the creature, but according to the reports, he did notice some unusual scratch marks on the guardrail where Shoki said it had climbed over. Now, one stage sighting is easy to write off. People misidentify animals all the time. But just 2 weeks later, another Loveland police officer would report seeing what looked like the very same creature. This time, it was Officer Mark Matthews. He was driving through the same area when he noticed what looked like an injured animal lying in the middle of the road. Thinking another car might hit it, Matthews pulled over and got out to move it. But as he got closer, the animal suddenly stood up. Matthews later described it as looking like a large reptile with frog like features. Caught off guard, he pulled out his service revolver and fired a shot. Nobody knew if the bullet actually hit the creature. Now, this wasn't just another random sighting. It happened less than 2 weeks after Officer Ray's showcase encounter. It happened in almost the same location, and this time it involved another police officer. That's why a lot of people started taking the story more seriously. Unlike the original report from 1955, these sightings came from trained officers who were used to observing unusual situations. For years, these two encounters became the biggest piece of evidence for people who believed the Loveland frog was real. But the story doesn't end there, because years later, one of those same officers came forward with a very different explanation for what he believed he actually seen. At this point, the question wasn't whether the officers had seen something. The real question was, what did they actually see? Was it a really Loveland frogman, or was it just an escape reptile that people misunderstood? Years later, retired officer Mark Matthews looked back on what happened that night, and according to him, the story had become a lot bigger than the actual incident. Matthews said he never believed he'd seen some kind of monster standing on two legs. Instead, he thought it was probably a large tailless iguana that happened either escape or been abandoned by its owner. He also cleared up another one part of the story. According to Matthews, he didn't fire his weapon because the animal was attacking him. He fired because he wanted to recover it from finding out it was the same strange animal Officer Ray Shockey had reported just 3 days earlier. For Matthews, that was the answer. The Loveland Frogman wasn't some unknown creature hiding in the Ohio wilderness. It was just an escaped exotic reptile. And over the years, that explanation became the one most people accepted. But it still left a few questions. If it was only an iguana, why did two experienced police officers describe such a strange encounter? And what about the first report from 1955? That happened almost 20 years before either officer claimed to see anything. Over the years, people have come up with all kinds of explanations. The most common one is simple misidentification. Think about it. It was dark. The officers only saw the animal for a few moments. And when you're looking at something through a car's headlights in the middle of the night, it's easy to get its size or even its shape completely wrong. Some people believe it was nothing more than a reptile, or maybe another animal that looked strange in those conditions. Then there's the original story from 1955. That one has its own problems. There were no photos, no physical evidence, and to this day, nobody has publicly verified a police report or a newspaper article from that time describing the incident. Most of what we know comes from accounts that were published years later, which makes it hard to separate the original story from everything that got added over time. When you put all of that together, it's not that hard to see why so many people believe the Loveland Frogman was never a real creature at all. But even with all of this explanation, the story refused to die. Over the years, the Loveland Frogman became much more than just another strange story. What started as a few eyewitnesses' accounts slowly turned into one of Ohio's most well known cryptid legends. And today, the town of Loveland doesn't try to hide from it. Instead, it embraces it. You'll find the frogman and local artwork, souvenirs, community events, and even in tourism. In 2023, the city even introduced the Frog Prince as an official community mascot. It wasn't meant to be a frogman itself, but for a lot of people, it was another sign of just how closely the legend had become tied to the town. The story has even made its way into movies. Also in 2023, the found footage horror film Frogman was released, using the legend as the main idea behind its story. And for a lot of people outside Ohio, that was their first introduction to the Loveland Frogman, including me. Almost 70 years after that first reported sighting, people are still talking about it.